Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. John Schrem here, head of development at Kinolime. And with us today is Mike Gabrawy, the producer of Hotel Mumbai and some amazing other films, who's also a dear friend and a consultant here at Kinolime. Mike, thanks for joining.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I know your phone must have been blown up the last 24 hours with this Trump news. I want to ask, basically, what's going on? Maybe you could tell us from your perspective out in Los Angeles and, as a seasoned producer, tell us what's going on here with this Trump tariff.
Well, I think it's pretty consistent with some of the other kind of announcements that Trump has made. I think it's created a bit of chaos and confusion in the industry as we try to parse through what the actual practical implications are going to be for our industry. So at this moment, and I'm on a handful of threads, we are on the eve of the Cannes Film Festival, the single most important calendar, most important international event
Right.
for our industry, and frankly, this has just sent kind of reverberations, and much in the same way that some of his other tariffs, what he says today may not be what he says tomorrow, and I think that's where there's a lot of ambiguity in what was said and how that's going to um, how that's going to manifest in a practical way is still yet to be determined and yet to be seen. I think this announcement creates more questions than it does provide answers. We don't know what that means, but if the past is any indication, this is a prompt to start having conversations and negotiations with international parties and partners to find a path forward.
Now, for those that may or may not know, people think Hollywood, right? That's where, for century, we shot films. Maybe you can walk us through how common is it for a film shoot to shoot overseas nowadays in this climate and market?
I think it's much more common to have films shooting internationally than it does to have them shooting in the US. I think the US is it's the subsidies that are provided in the US are not competitive in comparison to what you can get as far as government subsidies in places like the UK and Australia and Europe
Mhm.
and Canada. So producers, as we chase the kind of bottom line constantly in a market that's contracting drastically, are looking for the most economical places to make a film that also work creatively. And that's the other challenge here is we're talking about IP. It's not a kind of product. So if you're making, I mean, Hotel Mumbai being a very good example of this. This is a movie that was shot half in Australia and half in Mumbai, and it would be very very hard to double Mumbai in Atlanta. So
Yeah. Yeah.
how do you tell these international stories in a way if if the IP is born in America, how does that work? 'Cause
Now,
yeah.
yeah, let's just like role play for a second. Like, what if this goes through? From a producer's perspective, like, how is this going to change how you make your movies? What do you think this is going to do for the industry? I mean, again, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know. Is he posturing right now? Is he just trying to get the partners to the table, right, to have a more favorable deal? I'm thinking, is he trying to get the states to step up and spend more money or allow more money, domestically to have films shot in certain states that aren't playing ball? But like, let's role play. If this happens, what do you think is going to happen? How is this going to change how you make movies?
I think I think he did it in a way that there could have been a more thoughtful way to unroll this. And I think there are conversations. He has these ambassadors, right? He has Mel Gibson, John Voight, Sylvester Stallone as ambassadors. Mel Gibson, having done a number of, having connections to Australia and having an Australian distribution company, I think that there were conversations already happening about a US
Hmm.
federal incentive. And I've always said that if you did one that was even modest in the 10-15% range, in Australia, the local PDV is, or I'm sorry, the local producer's offset is 40%. So imagine if you had a very small one as a federal incentive here, and you let the states compete on a regional level, that would be a really healthy ecosystem for independent producers to be able to access. There's also kind of more more specialized incentives, like there's a 181 tax structure that
Hmm.
allows
Hmm.
for an accelerated deduction that we've been using. It sunsets this year. It ends in 2025.
Hmm.
I've been able to utilize it on my last three movies, but I think if there had been an alternative path, the spirit of this is, I think, it's needed, right? We want to bring production back to the US, but I think that right now there is no path that makes sense. In my opinion, what this does is it will potentially collapse the independent film market. Like
Hmm.
that cost is just going to be it's going to be passed on to distributors if there's a tariff, which I don't know how it is because traditionally intellectual properties like films and television, they're not subject to tariffs in the traditional sense because um, they're usually imposed on physical goods, not
Yeah,
IP. So
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
don't know how that is going to manifest, but the idea of having some sort of net there. But I think right now, if there were tariffs put on a film, that would be passed on to a distributor, and the distributor is going to pass that on to the consumer, and then the consumer is going to pay more for something that they're already not paying for. So you have like a series of a contraction post-pandemic of the independent film space, right? Where the pay one windows for these films, like during the pandemic, everybody was renting everything and watching everything they get their hands on. There's a contraction afterwards. Then you have a double strike. Then you have
Yeah.
the kind of more regional problem of LA having these devastating fires. And then when the industry is already after this double strike that crippled the industry for many months, your next you now have put something that like that will in essence kind of collapse the independent film industry. I believe there can be potential carve outs for studios and things like I don't know how you can look at this and not say the studios are shooting in Australia and the UK and all these
Yeah.
places and bring it back. How is that going to work for them? So even if you carve out the studios or you make exceptions for certain US companies, I think the independent space I don't know how you'd be able to survive this, like without a government bailout on a domestic basis of how we finance
Yeah,
movies.
I could see. It just seems like the independent films are in dire, straits right now, and they're going to be handcuffed. Maybe the more, slice of life, coming of age movies or dramas set in anywhere USA would maybe be fine, but the action thrillers that are operate in a certain space, that use international locations to, just also. Well, I guess what Trump doesn't realize is that it's not that we're shooting overseas to take advantage of tax incentives, which is partially true. Part of it is the escapism and the exotic locations. I mean, look at White Lotus, right? Like part of those productions being shot overseas is because Americans want to see a different, milieu. They want to see a different landscapes and locations because we want to, Bond's film, James Bond movies, they thrive on that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that's the whole creative conversation too. And you talk about right, Lotus, like how are the streamers? Their whole model is built on shooting abroad and
Yeah.
exploiting internationally. Like how does that work if there's shows that being a perfect example of shooting in Thailand, right? Like
Yep.
how does that
Yep.
work?
Yep.
Yeah, so I think there's just right now more questions than there are answers, but it the the one constant is like the timing of this being right before Cannes and like
Literally.
all it really is it's the same way that there's so much uncertainty in other tariffs, other structures that have been said, that I think it's hopefully something that will sort itself out. Is the independent film industry in trouble? Yes, and it has been for about 100 years. So
Yeah, that's true.
that isn't going to change. There are still going to be people making films, and if you're
Yes.
making
Yeah.
films here, you're still going to be making films. It's just it's going to make them more cumbersome and harder in this configuration. And I don't know, kind of broadly speaking, films are what 20-30% more expensive to produce now than they were a few years
Yeah.
ago, and the market contraction means you're getting 30, 25-30% less for them in the marketplace. Well,
Yeah.
how does that economically, how does that work? And that's part of I think the struggle that all independent filmmakers are facing now.
And it's going to put a real pressure on the unions here to film because, again, part of the allure of shooting overseas is working with crews. Your dollar goes further in certain countries, right? Like Romania, there's crews out there, there's less restrictions. It's just like I feel like it's going to bust at the seam. And yeah, I don't know what will happen. I'm not a doom and gloomer. I feel like with roadblocks, the inventive entrepreneurial, mindsets kind of seep in and change and will adapt. But man, I mean, talk about timing, just like this guy picks the perfect time to drop bombs right before Cannes. I mean, I know you're going. I mean, that's what you guys will all be talking about over there, and it's just, it's really, really tough. it could just be a knee-jerk reaction. Who knows what'll happen in a few days? But or maybe he's getting it to get the conversations going and get our international partners to maybe bend on a few things, and or domestically, like I think, is getting the states to kind of cough up more money and make more movies here. But yeah, what he's suggesting would just be outrageous and really send the already shaky business. I mean, the mantra was survive till 25, right? We're here in 25. What's the next thing? You know what I mean? Like avoid death till 28 or something. It's nuts.
Yeah, I mean, the
So
industry, exactly. The industry's reeling, but I think we don't know. He said he's going to authorize, right, the Trade Commission. So he's
yeah, sure.
authorizing
Yeah,
it. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
what I believe is part of the strategy to
Sure.
stir
Yeah.
things up and to start the conversation. And there's nothing I think American producers and filmmakers would like than to be able to shoot in our, shoot at home. I mean,
Yeah.
I did a couple of days of pickups on a movie that we shot in Los Angeles, and I was bemoaning how California, how can we have all the resources here
I
and not
know.
be able to make movies in California?
I know.
Everything is here between the best crews, all the
Yes.
talent,
It is. Yep.
locations. You have these studio backlots that are, ranches that every studio has a ranch that
I
has
know. I know.
myriad locations. It's the place to make movies, and yet we can't economically we can't afford to do it.
Well, maybe in this craziness, something good will come out of it. I'm hoping so. Mike, thanks so much for joining. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure your phone's blowing up, but thanks for taking the time today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.